Hi guys! Welcome to the first video in 2024, or rather, the first video that I filmed in 2024. Well, the year has been great, and I think many of you might have received a present from your fellow friends, knowing that, as they know that you are coffee lovers and etc. And now every month, we always see new products in the market, new coffee drippers, new brewing equipment. And sometimes it can be quite challenging, like, oh no, how do I actually approach this dripper? It looks a bit different from what I usually have. In today's episode, what I hope to help you to achieve is to help you to understand the structure of a dripper and how can you come up with a basic brewing recipe or a default recipe that you can play along with your new dripper. Last year, in Christmas, I received a present. Here you go. A new dripper that I have not used. It's my first time. New year, new me, new you, new coffee dripper. It's also the first giveaway that we will do in our channel for this year. At the end of this video, we'll be sharing with you how you can actually get one of this dripper, and we'll be giving 3 of these away. Alright, now let's look into how can you brew your coffee with a new dripper. Okay, this definitely looks more like a conical dripper as compared to the flat bed dripper. So this is one of the things that I will always identify first. Reason being, so you know which filter paper you need to use, and also that will determine what is the kind of grind size that you want to use for your brew as well. In general, if we compare conical dripper versus the flat bed tend to have a slower flow rate and conical has a faster flow rate. And the brew bed height that we have in a flat, it's lower and shorter, whereas in a conical, it's higher because of the shape itself. That will actually changes how we approach the coffee in terms of the contact time and the grind size that we want to use. So this is the first thing that we'll identify, which is the shape. Second thing that I'll look into is actually the internal part of the dripper itself. So for a conical dripper, it is very important for you to identify what is the groove or how deep the grooves are for a conical, because that is what would directly impact the flow rate of your brew itself. In this case, for this one, there is a lot of groove, and not only that, it's actually very deep. So it's going to create more air pockets as compared to a traditional V60 that you will have. In this case, using the same grind size, same filter paper, same amount of coffee, you will get a faster flow rate, hence a shorter contact time for the brew itself. So these are the 2 things that I'm looking at. Finally, one final thing that I will want you to pay attention to is actually the size of the hole at the bottom. So these will also help to determine the flow rate of the brew itself. And if you notice, the one factor that I always talk about is actually the flow rate, because the flow rate is determined by the entire structure of the dripper. If you are given a smaller dripper with a small hole, perhaps the flow rate will be slower. One with less groove, less air pocket, your flow rate will be slower. So this is how you can decide and determine the grind size that you should kickstart off. So with the base recipe that I have for a higher V60, I know if I want to use the same coffee, perhaps I have to go a tad finer for my brew in this dripper, because this is going to flow a lot faster. But maybe I do not have to. It really depends on the solubility and the roast profile of the coffee itself. So assuming if, let's say, I'm using a 26 clicks with a Hario V01, and with this, perhaps I have to use a 24 clicks on my Comandante. So this is how you can actually determine and approach a new dripper. Oh yes, before I forget, there's another thing that you might want to pay attention to is the material of the dripper. Okay, because different material, which currently in the market we always see plastic, glass, ceramic, and metal. So these 4 materials have different heat conductivity, and that would help you to decide what is the starting temperature that you want to use and adjust as accordingly. So my default is always about using ceramic V60 as my default, and I'll make changes as accordingly. So for ceramic, washed coffees, I think in one of the videos we talk about washed coffees, I tend to use 93 to 96. And whereas for natural anaerobic, honey, the more heavily processed coffee, I tend to use a lower temperature because they have a higher solubility, which I will consider between 86 up to 90. So for today, since we are using ceramic, and I think we have prepared a coffee. This coffee is from Ethiopia, a washed Ethiopia. Very classic coffee that we have. Basically, it's a coffee that I think many of us fall in love with when we first had a pour over or filter. Very floral, nectarine, lemonade-like. So, since it's a washed coffee, ceramic, I'll kickstart with 93 degrees Celsius, and if I need, then I'll go higher, depending on what's the cup result. And this is a small, I would say this size, if I were to compare to what the default or something that I'm very familiar with, which is the Hario V01. So for a small dripper, I will consider to use between 12 grams to 14 grams. Okay, one tip here, why do I want to restrict or like set a specific range for my dose? Reason being, if I were to use 14 grams in a Hario V01 and a Hario V02, the coffee bed height that sits in the dripper is actually different. One is actually taller than the other one, and that's for you to find out. So in this case, I'll be using 12 grams. Of course, another good thing that you might want to consider when you want to decide on your dose is what is the final output that you are trying to achieve. If you are working in a cafe, what is the cup size that you are serving your customer? And then if you are brewing at home, how much coffee do you want to enjoy? So that will help you to determine what is the dosage that you want to use. So since you mentioned that this is going to have a faster flow rate, I would go a tad finer than I usually would on a Hario V01. So 12 grams ready. Okay, so one thing to note is, okay, a V60 is called V60 because of the 60 degrees for the angle of the filter paper. But for this one, they actually market it as a CT62, which is 62, the angle, it's called degrees, 62 degrees. I was like, that doesn't sound right to me, but okay, 62 degrees. With that, right, you also can conclude that this is actually a lot wider. That's one thing. And why am I bringing this up? It's because that will determine how you fold your filter paper. If you have watched one of my episodes for the filter paper, I think I covered about how you should fold your filter paper when you're using a origami as well as a Hario V60. So for this particular dripper, instead of folding a little bit inwards, like how we usually recommend you to do for your Hario V60 and etc., I actually recommend you to actually fold right along the crease. And that will actually it will actually fit the dripper better. So if this is what's gonna happen if you don't fold your filter paper and fit the dripper. You notice this is the one that we fold a lot more than the crease itself. You realize that the air pockets, or rather the filter paper, doesn't fit the dripper nicely. There's more gaps. So what happens is from your brew to brew, it will actually be inconsistent because this actually changes the flow rate of your coffee as you brew along the way. So do make sure that when you are folding your filter paper, it fits the dripper that you are using. Hey, so since this is a conical dripper that I'm very familiar with, I will just use my default recipe, and the only thing that I want to change here is my grind size. Okay, going in circular motion for our first pour. So for my first pour, I'm introducing up to 50 grams of water. For me, when I want to approach a new dripper, I do it very systematically because I'm not sure if there is anything that I'm not aware of or how does it impact the brew. So I only change one thing at one time. That's how you get to understand your dripper better. So in general, your coffee is not going to be very crazily different just because you change from one conical dripper to another conical dripper. I will see it and approach it more of like it's a form of calibration. What are the small little things that I have to change here and there with the understanding of the structure of the dripper itself. And that will help me to determine my first default recipe and if I need to make any adjustment as accordingly. So compared to my usual Hario recipe, clearly my water is going down at a much faster rate. So instead of doing my usual 4 pour that I would do for my washed coffee, I decided that I want to do a 3 pour because I'm concerned that whether the contact time between the water and the coffee itself, is it sufficient? And we are done. One thing you notice is just now we were talking about flow rate, changing the grind size, things like that. So what exactly does flow rate impact on your brew or your coffee? You will notice even for pour-over drippers, there is actually immersion going on. It's not just percolation, there's a tad bit of immersion going on depending on the number of pours you do. The less pour you do, the more immersion that you have going on in your brew bed as well. And your extraction will be lower as you reduce your amount of pour. Because every time when you introduce new water into your brew bed, you are actually adding more extraction or increasing your extraction percentage rate in your brew. So these are all the things that you might want to consider and adjust as accordingly. So like what I always mention, it's very important for you to know your basic before you go into something advanced. If you are very new to this whole entire coffee brewing, I would say stick to one dripper first. Get to understand your different variables of temperature, numbers of pours, water allocation, things like that. before you move on to different dripper. Perhaps the next time what we can do, we can cover more about immersion and percolation and how do you determine, like for one coffee, how should you actually decide which is actually better. So because for me as a brewer, I always believe that like different coffee has to be brewed or treated differently. There's no one best dripper in the world. There's no one best brewing method. It's only how good you are at brewing your coffee. Alright, so as mentioned earlier on, we'll be giving not just the dripper but the entire set. So it comes with a cup and this handle. And guys, if you know, this year is the year of dragon. So this will be the perfect dripper for you to use to brew for a relative this Chinese New Year. So leave a comment at the bottom of this video. Share with us what is your favorite dripper in 2023, and we will make the draw on the 9th of February, 8 PM. I'll do it live on my IG. So I'll see you guys then. Thank you.